Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. The autumn afternoon had settled into that quiet hour when the air feels almost heavy with calm, and the world seems wrapped in amber light. The golden leaves had begun their slow descent, drifting from the tall chestnut and oak trees that lined the narrow park path. Every gust of wind sent a swirl of color across the gravel, so soft it seemed like the earth itself was breathing. It was in that gentle hush that she first saw him, not in some grand or orchestrated fashion, but in the simplest way, one passerby crossing paths with another. Yet it was the ordinariness of it that made it remarkable, for in that moment it felt as though time had leaned in, whispering, "Pay attention." She had not gone there seeking company. Her thoughts were her only companions as she walked beneath the canopy of rust and gold, her scarf drawn close against the crisp air. The crunch beneath her boots was steady, almost like a rhythm that carried her forward without much need for thought. But when her eyes lifted, there he was, just a few steps ahead, pausing to gather the scattered leaves in his hand as though they were treasures. There was nothing hurried about him, no rush to move on, and perhaps that was why her gaze lingered longer than she expected. He seemed in some quiet way to belong to the season itself. There is something curious about the first glance shared between two strangers. It is neither a full story nor an empty page, but a sparks, more uncertain, yet carrying the power to kindle something far greater. She might have turned her eyes away, as politeness sometimes demands, but instead she found herself studying the faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, the ease with which he admired the simple beauty of fallen leaves. And in that instant she felt a stirring of recognition, though she could not name it. As she drew closer, their steps aligned without effort, as if the path had been waiting for just this crossing. He lifted his head, meeting her eyes with a glance that was neither too bold nor too shy, simply honest, as though he had known it would be her walking toward him all along. The leaves danced between them, caught by the soft wind, and when he spoke, it was not with practiced charm, but with a warmth that felt both familiar and unexpected. "It's as if autumn is showing off today," he said lightly, brushing the crumbled edge of a leaf between his fingers. The words were simple, but something in the tone carried an intimacy, as though he were not speaking to the world, but to her alone. She answered with a smile, surprised at how easily her reply came, how natural it felt to be part of this moment. Their conversation began as lightly as the breeze, remarks about the colors, the way the air held that mix of smoke and chill, even the crunch of the leaves beneath their feet. Yet beneath those casual words, something else stirred. It was the awareness of being seen, not in the hurried, distracted way of everyday life, but with a kind of quiet attention that leaves an imprint long after. The golden light deepened around them as the sun began its slow descent. With each step, it seemed the world had drawn itself into this single walk, this single meeting. She could not explain why her heart felt lighter, or why his presence seemed to echo a part of her own she hadn't realized was waiting to be heard. But sometimes life allows no explanation. Sometimes it is enough simply to feel and to recognize that what is unfolding is rare. And so, among the golden autumn leaves, the unexpected became unforgettable. The park had grown still, as though the trees themselves had drawn closer together to shelter the quiet scene from the world beyond. The bench, worn smooth from years of waiting, stood just beneath the branches of an old elm whose leaves fell one by one, landing like soft confetti on the ground below. It was not a place of grandeur, nor was it intended for ceremony. It was simply there, ordinary and steadfast, offering rest to those who passed. Yet on that afternoon it seemed to have been placed with intention, waiting for the very moment when two strangers would find themselves guided to the same spot. She had walked until her legs grew tired, her thoughts wandering as freely as the leaves overhead. The bench caught her eye as a welcome pause, a place where she might sit and let the beauty of the season settle within her. When she lowered herself onto the cool wood, she felt the relief of stillness, the quiet gift of being alone yet surrounded by such gentle beauty. She had not expected company, nor had she desired it. Solitude was sometimes its own comfort, yet life, in its quiet mischief, had chosen differently. He arrived with the same unassuming grace, his steps measured, his gaze caught between the path ahead and the canopy above. She noticed the way he hesitated before approaching, as though questioning whether the bench was meant for her alone. But perhaps the pull of the moment was too strong, for after a brief pause, he seated himself at the other end. They were separated by just enough space to remain strangers, yet close enough to feel the invisible thread that now bound their silence together. There is a peculiar charm in sitting beside someone you do not yet know. Words are unnecessary at first, for the heart is occupied with the awareness of presence, the sound of another's breathing, the rustle of fabric as they settle, the small acknowledgement that one is not quite alone. The leaves continued to fall around them, and though they did not speak, something in the air seemed to shift. She glanced sideways, as if by accident, and found him watching the sky through the branches, his expression softened by thought. There was nothing remarkable in his appearance, no grand gesture to set him apart, yet she felt drawn to the quiet steadiness he seemed to carry. He, in turn, turned slightly toward her, catching her movement with a glance that lingered for just a moment longer than politeness required. And in that brief exchange something passed between them, unspoken, delicate, but undeniable. When at last words came, they did so gently, as though they had been waiting for the right moment to break through the silence. He remarked on the park, on how it seemed most alive in autumn, when every color showed itself before surrendering to the ground. She answered softly, surprised at how easily her voice joined his, surprised too by the way her words felt as though they belonged here, beside him, carried by the quiet air. Their conversation began with the simplest of thoughts, observations on the season, the charm of the leaves, the faint scent of smoke that drifted from a nearby chimney. Yet with each sentence a thread was woven, binding them closer. The bench, once a space of solitude, became a shared ground where strangers began to shed their distance. There was laughter, light and unforced, bubbling up when the wind swept a cluster of leaves into their laps, as though the season itself wished to join their exchange. There were pauses too, but never the kind that made silence heavy. Rather, they were the kind that deepened the connection, the kind that made one realize how rare it is to feel at ease with someone so newly found. The world continued around them, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of children running through the grass, the fading hum of traffic beyond the park's edge. Yet it all seemed softened, less urgent, as though the bench had carved out a world of its own, a small and fragile world where time slowed, and the simplest company became extraordinary. When she finally rose to leave, she did so with the faintest hesitation, as though parting from that bench meant parting from something unspoken yet precious. He stood too, offering a nod, a smile that seemed to carry both gratitude and the unspoken hope that this meeting was not meant to end here. And so, on a quiet park bench, two strangers discovered the gentle beginnings of something that neither had been seeking, but both would remember. The air carried a stillness that made every sound feel sharper, every word more noticeable. The leaves moved with a whisper in the branches above. their soft fall punctuating the pause between one thought and the next. And then, in that tender space where silence had lived long enough to feel comfortable, words came forth, quiet, unassuming, almost ordinary. Yet from the very first sentence it felt as though the moment had been waiting, poised delicately, for this exchange to begin. He spoke first, not with grand declarations or carefully chosen lines, but with the ease of someone who had no intention of impressing, only of being present. A simple observation about the crispness of the air, or perhaps the way the sun caught the golden edges of the leaves, was all it took. It was not what he said that mattered so much as how it seemed to fall perfectly into place, as though the universe itself had conspired to put those words into his mouth at just that instant. She answered in kind, and though her voice was gentle, it carried the weight of something more. Her reply was not forced, not shaped to please, but natural, flowing as though it had been resting on her tongue, waiting for the right person to hear it. And so the thread between them, invisible yet undeniable, began to take form. There is a curious quality in conversation that feels destined, one that cannot be faked or replicated. It is not about the brilliance of the words themselves, but about the way they fall, the rhythm they take on, and the way the heart seems to lean in closer with each sentence. Every phrase becomes a step forward, every laugh a shared secret, every pause a gentle acknowledgement that silence, too, can hold meaning. What began as simple talk of the season soon unfolded into something deeper, though neither of them quite knew how. They spoke of childhood memories tied to autumn days, of raking leaves into piles only to scatter them again, of long walks home from school when the world seemed painted in fire and gold, of quiet evenings spent with books while the wind tapped lightly at the windows. Their words mingled easily, as though they had been rehearsed in some forgotten dream. The more they spoke, the more the air seemed to shift, as if the park itself leaned in to listen. The branches swayed above them, their shadows dancing across the ground, and the crisp breeze carried the sound of their voices, weaving it into the very fabric of the afternoon. With every exchange they found themselves drawing nearer, not in steps, but in spirit. There was laughter, light and unrestrained, that bubbled forth at the smallest of remarks. There were glances, too, held just long enough to stir something unspoken, something that words might never fully capture. And when the conversation slowed, when silence briefly returned, it was not with awkwardness, but with comfort, as though their hearts had agreed that words were only one way of speaking. It is strange how quickly time bends when conversation takes on this quality. What felt like minutes stretched into hours, and what should have been hours passed like fleeting moments. Neither of them wished to name it, for to do so might have broken its spell, but they both felt it. That sense of rightness, of belonging, of being exactly where they were meant to be. As the sky deepened with the colors of evening, their voices softened too, carrying with them the quiet recognition that the day was nearing its close. Yet neither seemed eager to part, for to step away from this exchange felt almost like stepping away from fate itself. And perhaps it was that hesitation, that shared reluctance to end what had so naturally begun, that gave the moment its truest weight. So it was, through nothing more than a simple conversation, two souls discovered the delicate certainty that some meetings are written long before they happen. The afternoon had draped itself in colors so rich that they seemed to carry their own language, one that spoke without need of words. The British autumn is unlike any other. It does not demand attention through brilliance alone, but rather through the subtle harmony of shades that shift and soften with every passing hour. The golds glimmer gently, the russets deepen like embers, and the fading greens hold on just long enough to remind the eye of what has been lost, and what is still lingering. It was within this quiet splendor that the mood of their meeting was shaped, as though the season itself had conspired to set the stage. The park was dressed in its finest attire, every tree adorned in robes of copper and flame. The ground beneath them had become a patchwork quilt of fallen leaves, softening each step, muffling the noise of the world beyond. The light slanted low, carrying with it the warmth of the sun, but also the cool whisper of the coming evening, and in that delicate balance the heart seemed more willing to listen. The season itself had slowed, urging them to do the same, to linger rather than rush, to notice rather than pass by. For her, the colors carried with them memories, both tender and bittersweet. The sight of a red maple stirred thoughts of days once filled with laughter, of hands clasped during walks down familiar lanes. The golden birch leaves, trembling in the breeze, seemed to speak of possibilities not yet fully revealed. She felt herself softened by the season, more open to the unexpected, more willing to see beauty in the smallness of things. For him, the autumn colors seemed to carry a kind of steadiness. There was no panic in their fading, no sorrow in their letting go. Instead, there was grace, a reminder that change could be beautiful, that endings could be as striking as beginnings. His gaze lingered on the canopy above them, where sunlight filtered through like stained glass, casting patterns across their faces and hands. He felt as though the season were not only surrounding him, but quietly settling within him, making him braver in his silence and gentler in his words. The charm of these colors lay not only in their beauty, but in the atmosphere they created. The crimson leaves drifting down between them felt almost like blessings, soft reminders of how fleeting and precious each instant was. The oranges glowed with a warmth that seemed to draw them closer, dissolving the distance that still lingered between strangers. Even the browns, humble and often overlooked, grounded the moment, anchoring it in the real while allowing space for wonder. Every shade carried a mood, and together they formed a backdrop that seemed almost deliberate, as if the trees themselves had chosen to witness this encounter. The gentle melancholy of autumn was not sorrow but a sweetness, a reminder that beauty is heightened by its impermanence. And in that bittersweet glow, hearts are more willing to unfold, more willing to risk being seen. They spoke softly, their voices blending with the rustling of the branches, their laughter carried off by the wind that stirred the leaves into motion. Each word felt richer, colored by the atmosphere around them. There was a naturalness in the way their conversation moved, a rhythm that seemed in step with the swaying branches, the drifting leaves, the fading light. What might have been ordinary words were transformed by the setting, made luminous by the gold and red that wrapped around them. As the day leaned toward dusk, the colors deepened, becoming bolder as the light thinned. The park seemed almost enchanted, each shadow cast long and soft, each leaf aglow as if lit from within. The air grew cooler, yet the warmth of the season lingered in every glance, every pause between their words. And though the world beyond the park waited for them, they lingered, unwilling to step away from the spell the autumn colors had cast. And so it was beneath the quiet brilliance of British autumn, wrapped in its glowing shades, that the mood was set, not by words alone, but by the season itself, offering its beauty as a gift for hearts just beginning to open. The leaves fell one by one, carried gently on the wind, turning slowly as though reluctant to surrender to the earth below. Each drift and flutter seemed to trace a rhythm of its own, unhurried and graceful, as if the season had decided to teach them how to let go with elegance. And as those leaves descended, scattered across the path where they walked together, it was impossible not to notice how they seemed to echo the unfolding of something new, something tender and fragile, the quiet awakening of hearts learning what it meant to fall. There was no suddenness to it, no dramatic rush that demanded attention. Just as the leaves released themselves softly from the branches, love too seemed to loosen gently within them, growing with every step, with every glance, with every word exchanged. It was not loud, nor was it boastful. Instead, it was delicate, like the faintest brush of autumn air against the skin. Each moment carried a weight too subtle for the eye, yet too powerful for the heart to ignore. She found herself noticing details she might otherwise have overlooked. The way his voice softened when he laughed, the slight hesitation before he spoke, as though he valued choosing words carefully. And he, in turn, seemed drawn to the quiet light in her eyes, the way her smile revealed itself gradually, as if saving its fullest beauty for when it mattered most. These were not grand revelations, but small ones, the kind that accumulate with the gentleness of falling leaves until they form a carpet rich enough to cover the ground between two souls. The path they walked was strewn with autumn's confessions, every step cushioned by the season's offering. The colors beneath their feet mirrored the warmth building in the air between them, gold, red, russet, and brown, each hue speaking its own truth. Just as the trees let go of what they could no longer hold, so too did they let go of guarded silences, sharing stories that felt both deeply personal and astonishingly natural. The more they spoke, the more it seemed their words had been waiting for each other all along. Love often begins not in sudden sparks, but in the quiet recognition of something familiar, as though one heart had been listening for the echo of another. It was in the way their steps matched without effort, in the rhythm of voices that seemed to harmonize without thought. The leaves continued to fall, their descent endless and unhurried, a reminder that love, like autumn, does not arrive all at once, but reveals itself layer by layer, until one day the ground is covered in its fullness. There was something almost sacred in the silence that occasionally settled between them. It was not the silence of absence, but of presence, of two people so at ease in each other's company that words became optional. In those pauses, the world seemed to fold in around them, the leaves spinning in slow circles as if to celebrate what was quietly unfolding. Every falling leaf felt like a promise, every drifting petal of color, a reflection of their own hearts learning how to trust the fall. She wondered if he felt it too, that faint tremor in the air, that quiet pull that turned ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. He wondered the same of her, though neither dared to name it. Yet both knew, with a certainty they could not deny, that the leaves around them were more than decoration. They were a mirror of what was happening within. For as the branches grew barer, their hearts grew fuller, braver, and less afraid of the letting go that love requires. The breeze grew cooler, tugging gently at scarves and coats, urging the day forward. Still, they lingered, unwilling to part from the soft wonder of it all. They walked slowly, almost as if by slowing their pace, they might keep the leaves suspended in the air a little longer, might stretch the delicate magic of a season that would soon pass. And though they knew autumn would end, the memory of its falling leaves had already written itself into them. So it was, beneath the quiet rain of autumn's leaves, that two hearts, uncertain yet willing, discovered the beauty of falling together. The day had drawn itself toward its natural close, the light softening into that quiet hour when the sky holds both the blush of fading sun and the first hints of approaching dusk. The park, which only hours earlier had seemed alive with color and motion, now settled into a hushed calm. The leaves no longer fluttered with such energy. Instead, they drifted slowly, as though reluctant to surrender the last of the day. It was in this stillness that the time to part arrived, as gently inevitable as the turn of the season itself. Neither of them rushed the moment, Their steps grew slower, almost hesitant, as though each footfall carried the weight of knowing what would follow. Conversation that had flowed so freely now softened into fragments, words tapering off into silences that said just as much as speech could. They lingered in those pauses, unwilling to let them go, for silence itself had become a kind of language between them. When they reached the quiet curve of the path where one must go left and the other right, they stopped. There was no suddenness to it, no sharp break, but rather the gentlest unfolding of awareness. The world around them seemed to pause as well, the breeze stilled, the last golden light falling tenderly across their faces. For a moment it felt as if the entire season held its breath to witness what was about to pass between them. He looked at her, not with the boldness of certainty, but with the sincerity of someone who has discovered something they cannot easily leave behind. His smile carried warmth, but also the faintest trace of reluctance, as though part of him wished to hold the day still. She returned his gaze with one that mirrored his own, a mixture of gratitude for what had been shared and the quiet ache of wishing it need not end. In that exchange more was spoken than words could manage. The goodbye, when it came, was as gentle as the falling of leaves. A few soft words, simple and unadorned, yet carrying within them the weight of everything that had unfolded between the first meeting and now. There was no need for elaborate promises or declarations. What mattered had already been said in the glances, in the laughter, in the quiet steps side by side. The farewell was tender precisely because it carried an unspoken truth. Though the day was ending, something else was only just beginning. As they parted, each step away seemed both heavy and light. Heavy because leaving felt like a loss, light because of the quiet certainty that they would meet again. The air between them stretched, filled not with absence, but with a thread invisible and strong, connecting them even as distance grew. They did not turn back often, but when they did, it was enough to confirm that the connection remained, as sure as the path beneath their feet. The park, with its fading light and falling leaves, seemed to bless the parting. The trees bowed gently in the evening breeze, scattering a last shower of color across the path, as if to remind them that endings are never truly final. Autumn itself whispered that to let go is not to lose, but to make way for what is next. And so the goodbye became less an ending than a soft threshold, a doorway into something unknown yet full of promise. She walked on with a heart that felt both tender and alive, carrying the memory of golden leaves and shared laughter as though they were treasures. He did the same, each step guided by the quiet flame that had been kindled in an afternoon's chance encounter. They did not need to say aloud what each already knew, that beginnings often wear the disguise of farewells, and that the most delicate goodbyes carry within them the seeds of return. So it was in the soft hush of a British autumn evening that a gentle goodbye became the quiet promise of something yet to come. Thank you for joining me on this autumn journey of chance meetings, quiet conversations, and hearts slowly unfolding. Just like the falling leaves, every story reminds us of endings that bring new beginnings. If you felt the beauty in these moments, let it linger with you. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who loves stories too. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter waiting just around the corner.